And you're watching it in Portland. Portland really is the prime example. And President Trump just had so many of the influencers whose lives were threatened, who were Caitlin, the beautiful blonde woman who had the black eye from an Antifa member. They're threatening them online with violent acts. It's organized crime. They're completely organized. They're at all of these events. They're encouraging violence. They're calling everyone fascist. But it's more than that. It's hurting the American people. And that's why they're no different than MS-13 or any gang out there.
Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared.
And I'm Mike.
Starting out, going to give some shout outs to our newest Patreon supporters in the Executive Club. We've got Matt Etheridge and Jesse Comer. In the Platinum tier, we have Alyssa Bedwell. Thanks so much for signing up to support the show. We've been having a ton of fun on the premium feed. The last one we did had a butt rock song that was recorded by Mike and I. And Mike, I have to say, you really carried the chorus. I didn't know you had that in you, but the Antifa.
Yes, I did my best. I did my best with maybe my least favorite genre of music. And I want to say to one of our listeners who pointed out that I don't need to shout out the Patreon on the Patreon episodes themselves. Yes, actually, I don't know what day it is. That is the problem. Yeah. I don't know what day it is. I just turn around and I'm podcasting again.
This is too much content. But we're loving it.
But we're shouting out the Patreon here, so you should sign up and get access to that and get access to our reading series, which was about Catherine D's article on Nick Fuentes, female Nick Fuentes fans. It was a delight. I don't think she was particularly happy about it. She messaged us a bit. Signed up for the Patreon as well.
Yeah. Shout out to our standard, our premium tier member, Catherine D, who I don't think is in the premium tier any longer. But anyway, today's episode, we're going to talk about some stuff before we get there, but it comes from a listener request from one of our Executive Club members, and it's a closer look at the Turner Diaries, which is a fictional dystopian novel written by one of the most influential white supremacist extremists of, the pre-2000s era, and kind of served as the Bible for white supremacist terrorists since its publication. So that's going to be pretty heavy. So I think we gotta talk about Antifa.
Yeah, Antifa. But, it's not totally unrelated, Jared, because they're trying to claim that leftists are doing Turner Diaries every time they go out into the street dressed as Barney the Dinosaur. So we should reckon with it. So this is something that seems to be, really animate our audience. People seem to be interested in this topic. We have no political bent on this show, so I'm kind of surprised. But
yeah. We play it down the middle here, posting through it.
People don't seem to like the fact that Antifa is the target of the federal government here. But yeah, a couple weeks back they hosted a roundtable, if you recall, Jared, and it was a sort of a who's who of people who have been punched by Antifa or attacked by Antifa, mostly right-wing influencers.
Yeah, it was very bizarre. The purpose of this, and we've talked about it on premium episodes. I don't know if we've really talked about it on the main feed, but it's, the point of these influencers, like, why are they there? Why are they doing whatever? It is to justify the military occupation that the Trump administration would like to do in liberal cities across the U.S., places like Portland, places like Chicago. So what they're doing is giving valet treatment to these folks, boosting them, giving them special access to officials and facilities and stuff. And what they do is they just go there and they film protesters and they film somebody, film people in Barney the Dinosaur suits, and they're like, the radical left is a deadly menace to this country, and only Daddy Trump can fix the problem.
And if I may, fascists always need an enemy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, or a scapegoat or an enemy of some kind. It's you versus them. It's on two different sides of the line, and they are right now embattled by a lot of bad press. That wave started with Epstein, but it's been across the board, and the economy has not been doing great. There's signs that it may not be doing very well going forward.
Yeah, I opened up my my Fidelity account where my retirement savings sit, and I was like, wow, that line is going the wrong direction right now.
Line go down.
Line go down. What?
So I'm
scared.
We need an enemy, and we need to make sure that everybody thinks Antifa is dangerous or thinks Antifa is even real. And when I say it's, insinuate that it's not real, it is a style of protest. It's a kind of protest, not really the way they're depicting it. They're depicting it as a series of cells, organized cells, and so forth. And that's just
they're
accurate.
Treating it like a gang.
Right.
They're treating it like it's the mafia. Dude.
It's treating like the movie The Warriors, right? Where there's like all these chapters of Antifa as they, storming through the subways at night.
Yeah. It's those old movies where it's like, oh yeah, that aluminum recycling plant, that's a front for the Gambino family. Except they're like, oh, you see that organic smoothie parlor? That's a front operation for Antifa.
One of the people they brought out, Jared, is someone our premium subscribers already know about. Her name is Katie Davis Court, but we just call her, for some reason, we just keep calling her Katie Davenport. And so I think we're just going to keep doing that.
Shout out to East Iowa.
I feel like you did a little investigative reporting about her face. Yeah.
So Katie Davis Court, clenching my fist, saying this name correctly. She got headlines, just very briefly for people who don't know who she is, which why would you? She is like Andy Ngo's sort of protege at the Post Millennial, which is just a junk news blog, political operation run out of Canada. And what she does, like basically when Andy got too scared and freaked out to actually go cover protests anymore, and then he moved to the UK, Katie kind of picked up the mantle, and she is now somebody who will go to protest out in Portland or Seattle, just anywhere Pacific Northwest, and produce the Antifa scary clips that Andy shares. Really, I mean that's kind of her function, right? And something happened. I think it was last month. Yeah, it was last month. Something happened. I'm not clear.
Someone hit her with a flag. I believe it may have been a Palestinian flag, some sort of thing related to Palestine.
Okay, so that's what happened. She gets hit with a flag, and it gives her a shiner around her eye. So she gets a black eye.
Barely. It was like a nick around her eye. It looked like it like kind of nicked her, like a little cut. Like when I got a shaving cut that's like bad, like down there, it was a little bigger than that. And it was like right around the edge of her eye.
Yeah. So anyway, her eye kind of swells up a little bit, gets the area around her eyes discolored a bit. It gets her a Fox News appearance where it looks just like terrible. And I don't know, injuries in that area of your face, they like look worse and then look better. And then, they're kind of funny. But then when she goes to this White House roundtable, her black eye, and this is like, it's got to be more than a week after this happened. Her black eye looks the worst it's ever looked.
No, you skipped over something, that there was a picture outside of her where she took like a selfie with Andy Ngo. It's sort of like, we made it. We're in the White House, go girl, this kind of vibe in the picture.
Girl boss.
Yeah. And you don't really see the same thing. And then she comes in and she looks like, completely wrecked.
Yeah. I mean, she looks like fucking Muhammad Ali, like,
or Blanche Dubois at the end of Streetcar Named Desire or something.
So some speculation over whether that was the product of makeup or this injury with the flag. And, I think the makeup is a real possibility given who we're dealing with here.
Right. The fact that these people make up like 50% of the thing. I just imagine Andy Ngo, if she got the flu, if Katie Davenport, whatever, got the flu, I could just imagine Ngo like desperately on the phone with like urgent care and stuff like that. He's like, I need her out there. That's where I get my clips. Like, because he doesn't go out anymore. All he does is
anything.
Retweet her and make comments. But Andy himself has been really worked up into a lather, Jared, about the Muppets, about the Antifa. I'm calling them the Antifa Muppets. There's people in these spirit Halloween costumes that are, and they get the. You can see people just being like that. You can see people just like, vaping weed in the parking lot and being like, I'm going to get the dumbest shit in there. And then they go in and they're like, do you have any Lightning McQueen, like inflatable thing? It's like, no, we have Cookie Monster. Be like, all right, I'll do that. They're looking for the dumbest possible ones. And Andy is like so desperate. He's so desperate to like make this into some sort of like 70s, 80s dystopian, warlord like sci-fi movie out in Portland.
Well, he has to, right? Because it completely undercuts the story that they're trying to tell about like these are like militant psychopaths out here who are just itching to pull the trigger and kill an ICE agent. Yeah. And then like the camera turns and you just have like inflatable frogs and Barney bouncing around and like
yeah, he's directing some movie called Escape from Portland in his mind, and it's just like there's nothing but guys dressed in black just executing old ladies in the street with like with no feeling, just like that's the story in his mind. But instead of that, Barney the dinosaur shows up and is like do like just in front of the camera, and that's what he has to work with.
It's a bunch of inflatable animals, unicorns, teddy bears, Winnie the Pooh, whatever, just like bouncing around while like rave music like it's like so nothing's happening.
I need to read a couple of Andy's tweets here, and I love that he puts the city name and the date at the beginning, like it's like
it's a news wire.
That's a war journal, And he says, Portland, October 6th. A person has shown up in a Barney costume at the anti-ICE direct action. The costumes are meant to make the riots look like family-friendly events suitable for children. It is meant to sanitize Antifa's image. It's so good. Here's another
riots, one. The riots also?
It doesn't matter. It's like he's just mad. He's just seething that the Barney costume is there because he has to talk about it, and what he wants to talk about it is just like this imaginary guy in a ski mask just shooting an old lady who's begging for her life. That's what he thinks Antifa is. And then the reality is there's some guy who's just like stoned being like, hi Andy from a Barney costume. Here's another one. This is in Chicago. You've seen how violent the far-left extremists have been against ICE in Broadview, Illinois. They are highly organized and now, learning from the left-wing propaganda in Portland, have purchased their own animal costumes to whitewash the violence in Chicago. I like how Antifa is like, We've killed 700 people. What are we going to do? We've executed 700 old ladies in the street.
We got to turn this shit around. We're losing Halloween. Support.
Somebody's like just like shooting up and like, this derelict like in a ski mask. He's like, we need to go to Spirit Halloween. See if they've got a Lightning McQueen or a Tornado costume. That'll distract people. That'll distract and Andy's like.
And this clip is inflatable Cookie Monster, inflatable penguin. There's a Winnie the Pooh bear here, like, and for Andy in his very serious like, I'm a counter extremism analyst voice. It's just like they are highly organized. They have purchased their own animal costumes.
Kash Patel, please. It is not Cookie Monster. It is John Wayne Gacy under that suit.
It is so stupid, dude. It is so dumb. But it's like it's short circuiting their brains.
I'm just going to run through some other really dumb shit that they said because it's important, because this thing could surface later, right? And then you could wind up having to deal with it. We could have to sort through this crappy information. Let's just quickly just say Jack Posobiec said he was doing some reporting on Antifa, which to President Trump in his stupid roundtable, and then he says with a straight face, this started in Weimar Germany. It's like, oh, okay. Thanks, buddy. I appreciate that. I just wonder what else might have been happening at that time.
Mr. President, thank you so much for having us here today and holding this roundtable. Antifa is real. Antifa has been around in various iterations for almost 100 years in some instances, going back to the Weimar Republic in Germany.
I just wonder,
that's bad. It's supposed to be bad, right?
Yeah. So, other things he said quickly is he was rattling off like the Antifa terrorists. He said Luigi Mangione, which that's a stretch. The guy had like a whole bunch of reactionary stuff in his past and whatever. True, he has been embraced by some people on the online left that you can't deny, but also the idea that he's Antifa. I'm sure Luigi Mangione would be very confused by that depiction. Then he talked about that guy Crooks, who was out in Pennsylvania, who attempted to shoot Trump. We still don't know that guy's motivation. I want to stress that a million times. We have no idea if he himself was a right-wing guy or a Groyper or whatever he might have been. We don't know. We have no idea what he might have been.
We have no idea. There's almost like no information.
His parents were big-time Trump supporters. So it could have been, I'm not even going to speculate, but I just want to throw one possible scenario. Maybe he's mad at his parents or something. I don't know. But we have no reason to believe, based upon his associations, that he was Antifa or called himself Antifa. And then there's been this latest thing with the DOJ cheering this indictment, Jared.
Yeah. So the DOJ got a indictment against two suspects that they say are alleged Antifa members, and they were part of a armed attack on a ICE facility in Texas on July 4th. I think a lot of people have forgotten about this one, but it was actually pretty wild. There was like a small group of people that ambushed agents at this ICE facility. They had guns. They opened fire, and I don't know that they like killed anyone or anything. But the DOJ is now charging two of the people they're accusing of being involved in that. They still have to go to trial and prove everything, of course. But this is kind of the first thing since Trump put out his executive order and told FBI, DOJ, whatever, to try to prosecute Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization. This is the first indictment since then that seems to be trying to fulfill that. And the indictment's kind of weird. They attacked a federal facility in a way that was organized, according to this indictment, like premeditated and planned and stuff. This probably would have got a terrorism enhancement on these charges anyway. So it's, they're kind of just like waxing poetic in the indictment, but I don't know that, like, I'm not a lawyer or a prosecutor or whatever, but I don't know that like it's actually going to come up in trial, right? I mean, I don't know how much the court, to justify those terrorism enhancements, will need them to prove that Antifa, the way they describe it, exists, or that they were quote unquote members of Antifa or whatever. They're just going to have to prove that they had a political motivation and then attacked, a target that would qualify for the enhancement. So it's very much for show. It's concerning, certainly, but also if you're going to make a case that like some kind of coordinated left-wing attack, thing happened, this is probably about like the closest thing to a solid case they might have. just in terms of like making the argument, because according to the indictment, it was premeditated, it was organized, it was a plan. Like it, and if all of that's true, that is much more severe than Antifa Barney the Dinosaur. This is.
Well, it seems to me, and please correct me, having looked at this, I feel like you're stronger on this type of stuff. But it seems to me like they've set up this demand in the public for something, and they're just scrambling, and this is kind of like what they could come up with.
Yeah, they haven't like gone out and got anybody. They like went back to a case that they were going to prosecute anyway. And then they're like, hey, add this paragraph in the indictment.
Yeah, if we do this, it can look like we're really doing something about Antifa, because I don't want to dismiss the possibility that they're going to go after Antifa in like a horrible way and whatever. I don't want to write it off, but I have, because it would be very bad for them to just randomly, start picking off leftists, whatever. I know that's the most extreme fear people have. But I mean, if I were betting on this and not just thinking with emotion about it, I would bet that they would do almost jack shit. And just because that's the way the Trump, they are really based on rhetoric and propaganda. Most of the horror gets doled out against immigrants because that's where Stephen Miller is most. So I don't know, but it does seem like this particular charge or this whatever that they're adding onto this case seems to me like them trying to figure out a way they can justify the rhetoric they've been using.
Yeah, and immigrants are going to get hit a lot harder, right? Just because they're more vulnerable. They're easier targets for the administration to pick off. And
also, there's laws on the books that they can use to justify or to try to justify, even if they are adding many illegal measures onto the way they treat immigrants. There are some laws that, the cretins like Tom Homan can point to and say like, well, I'm doing this for that, etc.
Yeah. And I think you're kind of starting to see some early tells that this like promise to go get Antifa is probably going to be a bit trickier for them than they envisioned it. Because something that also happened after that White House roundtable is, the Andy Ngos of the world and whatnot, shortly after being like, well, actually, they're being treated as a domestic terrorist organization, but they should be treated as a foreign terrorist organization. Because if they can get that designation, if they can pull something out of their ass to try to justify that, well, suddenly, the Constitution, constitutional protection, civil liberties, all that doesn't mean shit anymore. You can spy on them. You can intervene. You can surveil them. Like your rights go out the fucking window if it's foreign terrorist organization designation. But I think they're going to have a insane struggle to even remotely justify that.
And the people that are listening to, and we know that they're listening to these influencers because they invited them to a public roundtable in front of everybody, have no idea what's going on and are making things up wholesale. Our friend, Daryle Lamont Jenkins, Jared, who runs One People's Project, Andy Ngo recently announced on X that he was the leader of Antifa, like that, like
the main leader, actually,
right? As if this were like, as if he were like the figurehead of of some kind of legitimate organization. And I find that very, very funny, knowing what I know about Daryle's life, how he goes about his life. I mean, the guy is, volunteers his time basically to try to ID white supremacists and sort of pieces together their associations. This is like his calling. He does it almost completely in a volunteer way and gets donations wherever he can. That's my knowledge of Daryle, and I know him to be a very warm individual. I would also add, Jared, something distinguishes Daryle from other Antifa that Andy Ngo mentions is he's a black man.
Yeah.
So that, probably a diversity in the issue in the movement, maybe. But they're not a ton of black guys who are very prominent. And Daryle just happens to be one. So he's the one who got singled out by Andy Ngo.
Yeah, Daryle is like an OG in anti-fascism in like a pure sense. And yeah, like you said, Mike, I mean, he has done this. One People's Project has been around since, I mean, long before anybody started talking about Antifa, in the public. One People's Project has been around the fucking block, dude. And like, I've like talked to Daryle, I've talked to other people who like volunteer time with One People's Project, and they have deep lore. It's just like, well, wouldn't you like to know that like James O'Keefe showed up at this white supremacist event in 2004? And it's just like, what? How did you get this? And it's like, oh, well, we were there. So it's like, this is like Antifa before it was Antifa, right? It's a documentation project. It's a research project, but it's awesome and it's great. But it is also very funny to think that Daryle Lamont Jenkins is somehow this like mastermind of a criminal enterprise of Antifa. Mike and I know Daryle, so I just called him up real quick.
Hey, what's up, y'all? This is DLJ. The Lord and Master of everything that's Antifa, apparently. And I just wanted to hit you up just to let you know I'm safe. I'm in an undisclosed location in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And all is good. All is good. And I think the important thing to remember about all of this is that it's a publicity stunt for these characters at some point. It's one that can get all of us hurt, and we have to bear that in mind and respond accordingly. But bottom line is they don't have a lot of teeth in what it is they're doing. And if we do not let them know that we recognize that and will do something about it, they will continue to do what they do. Andy Ngo's not going to hurt anybody if we don't let him. None of those characters that were in the round table, who two of which worked with Richard Spencer, and look where he's at today. I mean, and bottom line is, we got to stop being afraid. We got to stop being afraid, because that's what gives them strength. So now I'm just going to take off and just make sure that all my people are safe. Take care, y'all.
Before we leave this topic and move on to the great interview we have planned for today, I want to just highlight this video that the White House put out that is so insane. It is, Jared, it is the most insane thing. To me, I know they put out a lot of crazy stuff. They like AI generated pictures mocking immigrants and all this stuff. But to me, I found this just on a level of insanity that was really beyond my comprehension. That's saying something, because I've become pretty inured to this administration.
Yeah. So after this roundtable, the influencers they brought in, they lined them all up. And despite these people being like, I'm a journalist, I'm a real journalist, and I'm being attacked, and the Antifa says that I'm ugly, and that's a national security threat. They all participated in like a sizzle reel about Antifa that the White House put out, and this is just so fucking funny. I think we have to play it.
Antifa beats journalists. Antifa attacks our police stations. They attack our courthouses. They dox our law enforcement officers. No more. They are a terrorist group, and we are coming after them.
We are here at the White House today to unmask Antifa, to follow the money all the way to the top. If you want to get to the bottom of who is fomenting this chaos and violence in our country, you must follow the money.
I was a mainstream reporter in Seattle for 10 years before I quit mainstream media, in part due to its refusal to acknowledge the dangers of Antifa and radical left-wing.
In part.
I wonder what the other parts were.
Like, everybody hated me. I mean, I was insufferable. Okay.
violence.
Okay, whatever.
Part of the problem that we have is that a lot of people refuse to believe that Antifa is real. It is just a made up thing, but I've seen them.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
These people, like every other line is like, trust me, bro. Like, this is real. This is like, you know what I mean? Like,
I feel like that one gives it away where it's like, okay, well, we've got an issue. Everyone thinks we're full of shit.
Yeah, this is like, it's like, yo, the boogeyman is under my bed. I am telling you, like, stop it. Dad, stop it. Stop it. The boogeyman is under my bed. It really is.
He's not it. And then you look under the bed and he's like, he must have moved to the closet. I don't know what to tell you, man.
I've seen them. They are real, they are dangerous, and they are violent.
They are an organized, systemic, international criminal enterprise. And what the FBI is going to do is trace the money, follow the funds, and find every single person that was involved in funding the riots and the violent acts of criminality that they are perpetrating on our street.
I watched it.
You can hear Cash like scrolling rapidly through FanDuel as he's saying that, and like his Tinder like things. He's like, trust me, we're gonna do something. He's like, oh fuck, Jaguars game. That's a good spread. Like, yes, I'm free on Thursday. Like, yeah, we're gonna totally do something about these make believe like people that live under your bed.
Yeah.
Antifa brutally beat, harass, and threaten Americans in the street, but all of that ends with the Trump administration.
I was brutally attacked and almost killed by Antifa in the streets of Seattle. All of my colleagues have been attacked. I can't think of a single one who hasn't. Violence.
Colleagues? These are influencers. What the fuck do you mean colleagues?
My colleagues. Yeah, these guys. But I also want to point out, Jared, this is starting to take the tone of like although the music feels like a Paul Verhoeven film, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It also is undercut heavily by the fact that this is like the intro to a dating show or something, where it's sort of like, it's like, you know, it's like, I'm Jim, I'm a farmer, I live in Nebraska, like I'm out there looking for the love of my life, and like, you know, they just like cut.
Violence against journalists and police officers in our streets can't stand.
Just days ago, I was in the Portland jailhouse, and now I'm in this
There you go,
dude.
There you go.
This is Big Brother, dude. This
is exactly like the I Think You Should Leave sketch where Patty Harrison is like, I got sewn into the pants of the big Charlie Brown, and now I'm ready to spend that money. I love drinking wine.
I'm scared about how much I need wine. I can't even watch a movie anymore without a big pour of wine and popcorn.
This administration is built different, and Antifa's days are numbered.
And I want to thank President Donald Trump for designating Antifa a terrorist organization, and I'm looking forward to the FBI and the DOJ hunting down these people like the terrorists that they are.
All I gotta say, it's a bad day to be Antifa.
And Antifa's...
that was the only thing from that guy they put in the clip.
That's fucking cool.
He's like, that's all I gotta say.
That's cool because at least he's just leaning into the completely fake WWE nature of their politics, right? Because he's just like, it's a tough day for Antifa, you're going down. Like, that is much more on the that's what I would do. If you put me in and you want me to be like a complete scoundrel influencer who just makes shit up all the time, I'd be like, Antifa, like boogeyman under my bed, your days are numbered. We're coming for you. Dad is coming. He's getting the vacuum.
Antifa's days of using violence and intimidation against their political opposition are over.
And I've continued to report on them over the years, despite the threats of violence and actual violence.
I've continued to aggregate clips posted by other people despite the threats.
No Cookie Monster costume will get in the way of my reporting, which is conducted from another continent.
Violence that's happened because I owe a thank you to this country, the United States, for settling my parents who were victims of communism in Vietnam.
1 month ago, Charlie Kirk was murdered by a violent leftist. We all saw it, and we all saw thousands of leftists celebrate it. Antifa symbols were found on the bullet casings of the gun used to shoot and kill my friend.
The bullet casings of the gun?
He don't know. He doesn't know.
He doesn't know.
He sounds like he's flexing, like literally
that's not true.
Flexing, like in the mirror. He's like, Antifa, your days are numbers, and stop calling me Agent Pozo and making fun of my fucking piss tests.
Oh, what's your favorite part of a gun? Mine's the bullet casing part of the gun.
We won't take it anymore. President Trump is not going to stand for it. And I'm so grateful that we have a leader in the White House that understands how we need to fight these sophisticated networks and how we need to take these terrorists out.
I've been attacked by Antifa, doxxed by Antifa, harassed by Antifa, but we're not standing down. We're now coming for you.
Fuck yeah. Let's go. Honestly, I'm pumped up. Let's get them. Who are they? All right. Who are now we know, like, they're definitely real. Who are they? Where are we going? Where are we going now?
I can't believe, like, I'm just picturing in their head, it's like this average American who's watching this video montage, and there's just some random ass person they've never seen before who's just like, I've been doxxed by Antifa. I've been harassed by Antifa. And then there's just like, yeah, we have to kill these people. Like, I mean, this argument is just failing so bad.
Yeah, but I think, you know, to end it and move on to like something that's genuinely a threat, I would like to point out that you're in trouble when you have to repeatedly be like, trust me, bro, this is real.
Yeah.
We said it before, but I'll say it again. If you keep saying, you are giving away the game. You know it's not real.
Yeah, okay? Bigfoot is real. I've seen him. Shut up. And thank you, Mr. President, for taking my concerns so seriously, even though during that round table he was like nodding off.
Yeah.
And he's like,
your days are numbered. And
Andy,
Trump's like,
you know which one's Andy Ngo? And then Andy raises his hand and you can see what happens in Trump's head. He's like,
you know,
I thought that was you because you're Asian. Yeah.
I was about to say, he's like, oh, that would make sense that you're Asian. Yes. Yeah. You were saying about Cookie Monster, and he starts to fall asleep again.
Yeah.
Anyway, real shit here, Jared. So yeah, we had a listener request that we talk about the Turner Diaries. And I think it's important that we do it. Like, you know, every time we do a podcast, we're sort of like building foundation for future podcasts and to talk and refer back to. I don't know how many times we've referred back to, you know, Who the Hell Is episodes that we've done to try to just, you know, provide extra context. And Turner Diaries is something that's going to keep coming up.
Yeah, so we're going to just briefly go through the history of the Turner Diaries, what it is, who wrote it, and then we're going to talk to the son of the man who wrote it. Our main source here for the background on the Turner Diaries, I have to shout it out, is a paper that was written by J.M. Berger, who was on one of our early episodes after the reboot. One of the preeminent scholars of extremism in the 21st century. A lot of the details in this sort of run through are coming from his work. I'm going to put a link to it in the description if you want to read it yourself. So the Turner Diaries was published in 1978. And since then, more than 200 people have died in hate crimes and terror attacks committed by people who have been inspired by the book. The most high-profile example of this was the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, wherein Timothy McVeigh bombed a federal building and killed 168 people.
Yeah, before we get into the sort of, you know, some details about the plot of the book, I just want to highlight something that also comes up in the interview. What happened in Oklahoma City actually mirrors something that happens literally in the book, right, Jared?
Yeah, I mean, the influence is very clear. In trial, you know, established witnesses said that Timothy McVeigh was obsessed with this book. And it was the first piece of evidence that prosecutors introduced at his trial. And I think the Oklahoma City bombing is kind of how people found out about the book. And it sold a ton of extra copies afterward. So the Turner Diaries was written, the author, it was published under the name was Andrew MacDonald, which was a pen name for William Luther Pierce. William Luther Pierce was a very influential neo-Nazi white supremacist movement leader who ran a group called National Alliance. He was born in Atlanta in 1933. He studied physics in college, went on to work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, focused on space exploration. He was an exceptionally bright person. just a very smart mind, quick mind. But then the 60s came along, and in this period of American history, what was happening? You had the civil rights movement at the forefront. And it was around that time that this guy who was initially, open to the idea of equal rights for Black people really started to take a racist bent and believe that the Jews were forcing racial integration. In 1963, William Luther Pierce saw a clip of protesters at a speech hosted by George Lincoln Rockwell, who was the founder of the American Nazi Party. That was a pretty small organization that really specialized in, publicity stunts and propaganda. They had newsletters, and they would parade around just wearing swastikas, full Nazi regalia. In 1965, Pierce started, he moved and started, participating in the American Nazi Party, and would spend time reading racist books, just crazy stuff. He's working government jobs. And towards the end of the 60s, 1967, George Lincoln Rockwell was assassinated by a member of his own group. I've actually been to the spot where he died.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, speaking of One People's Project, I was hanging out with somebody from there, and she was like, "Oh, George Lincoln Rockwell was shot like 3 or 4 blocks from here." So we walked over there and went to the laundromat where he was killed.
Wow, that's crazy.
It was kind of surreal. It's still a laundromat, by the way. So William Luther Pierce, he becomes a top leader of the American Nazi Party, renames it to National Socialist White People's Party. There's a ton of infighting underway because William Luther Pierce is like, well, we have to cool it with the swastikas, right? We can't be like Nazis, right? But we could still kind of do the same thing under a different name, under a different, right? It's the National Socialist White People's Party. It's not much softer, but a little softer. He ends up falling out with members of the group, and in 1974 launches his own organization, the National Alliance.
I just want to interject. National Alliance, heavily influential on all the stuff that would be to come on the radical right. I mean, they're really, really foundational group.
So the next year, 1975, William Luther Pierce begins circulating like a magazine, newspaper type thing from National Alliance called Attack. And in Attack is where the Turner Diaries sort of started to come into existence. He published them initially as chapters, sort of dispatches from a future historian. And he did one per issue for about 3.5 years. In 1978, the installments were getting popular, and he compiled them into a book. Pierce kept leading the National Alliance until he died in 2002.
I just want to say that magazine, Attack, with an exclamation point, it's really sad that it got wasted on a white supremacist group, because it would be a really great punk scene, name or anything else. But it is what it is.
So that's a little bit about William Luther Pierce. Let's talk quickly about what the Turner Diaries is actually about. You've read the Turner Diaries, right?
I have. If you're looking for my hesitation, it's because it's maybe the worst fucking book I've ever read in my entire. Well, Andy Ngo's Antifa is pretty bad, actually, but this is just in terms of a literary experience, it is just horrible and grating. And you intimated this, but Pierce is a really smart guy. I mean, he's a very accomplished physicist, and it shows that writing is a different thing. It's not necessarily about your intellect and anything like that. There's a lot of finesse and lovemaking in writing to make the prose, really pleasurable, enjoyable, engaging. Your ability to sort of introduce symbols, etc. This is the most ham-fisted, insufferable prose I've ever read. And I think that the reason why people are attracted to it on the radical right is simply because it just creates enemies they don't like and then punishes them with violence. And that is really the repeated theme of Turner Diaries. In terms of the ham-fisted symbolism, there's something called the Cohen Act, if I recall correctly, Jared,
yep.
which is like an act that's where sort of people were, the government was taking guns away from people, that sort of helped spur this revolution. And like so subtle, the Cohen Act, right? Like, I mean, they're Jews, get it? I mean, that's like one of many examples of like really just leaden, stupid writing in it.
Yeah. It's written in the style of like dystopian fiction and narrated by Earl Turner, which is where the Turner Diaries derives its name. Earl Turner is a fictional historian from the future looking back on the quote-unquote Great Revolution. Like you said, it revolves around like the mass ban and confiscation of guns. And the government is run by a Jewish conspiracy that, uplifts and puts people of color into leadership positions. It's called the system. The economy is collapsing. I mean, the country is just degrading. And the protagonist is a group called the Organization, which Earl Turner was a member of. They try revolution, it fails. Then they go back to the drawing board. They try to infiltrate police and the government. They organize in smaller cells.
This is what he essentially fantasized National Alliance would be, right?
No, I mean, exactly. Yeah, the Organization very clearly is like his fantasy of National Alliance.
Right. And what the government does is what his fantasy of is what the government would do to wake up the people who are not really signing up to National Alliance, which is the extreme majority of every white person in the world who just didn't care.
Yeah. So like as this, this fictional historical recounting of the Organization, this starts to be where the real inspiration for white supremacist terror comes from, because William Luther Pierce essentially lays out a blueprint for how he thinks this should be done. He talks about how these cells of white supremacist terrorists are organized in detailed ways. He's talking about weapons, how to communicate, how to make explosives, strategies, tactics, the kind of thing that would inspire attackers later on. And as the book progresses, the Organization gets more and more extreme in their violence. They're killing political leaders, starting with black people, and then killing white collaborators, they call them. They bomb an FBI building using a car bomb, which is, bears some pretty striking similarities to Timothy McVeigh's attack on the federal building in Oklahoma City.
Timothy McVeigh also scouted the possibility of bombing the SPLC building.
Really?
Yeah, we were told that when we were there.
They start bombing media organizations like the Washington Post. They target a crowd that's hearing the president speak. They take down an Israel-bound airplane. They start attacking financial institutions, critical infrastructure. They are carrying out a full-scale ethnic cleansing campaign, and everything builds up to the day of the rope.
Right. And people, this is a big one, just like people should, you've seen that before, and you'll see like people say, oh, day of the rope. You'll see that in like kind of white supremacist propaganda, or alluded to on these more terroristic platforms like that are hosted by Telegram or Gab.
Yeah. It's, if you see Day of the Rope, that's a Turner Diaries reference. And what the Day of the Rope is when all the white, quote unquote, race traitors would be lynched in mass, in public. Just anybody they thought betrayed the white race would be killed. And then, like, towards the end of it, they steal and start detonating nuclear bombs, launches a global war, and the Organization seizes control of America and starts killing all non-white people on the planet. So it is just a pure genocidal fantasy. And that's what the Turner Diaries is. William Luther Pierce would try to publish a second novel called Hunter. That wasn't as popular. National Alliance also published something called Serpent's Walk. A lot of people think that Pierce probably wrote that too. But the Turner Diaries has sold hundreds of thousands of copies, and that's just in print, online. If you go in white supremacist circles, it's not hard to find PDFs of this book floating around, getting passed back and forth. Because the story sort of hinged on this plot point of like the revolution started when they started taking people's guns away. Turner Diaries got some circulation at gun shows, that sort of thing. From what I've read, that people suspect that might be how Timothy McVeigh kind of picked up on it, because Timothy McVeigh was
I recall
big
that.
gun nut. But yeah, it got massively popular, continues to influence stuff today, and it is absolute drivel. It is miserable to read.
It's also, imagine centering your story, the hero journey around somebody who just kills a lot of people. That's really, typically not how it's done.
Joining Posting Through It now, we have Kelvin Pierce, who is William Luther Pierce's son. In 2020, he published the book, Sins of My Father, Growing Up with America's Most Dangerous White Supremacist. Kelvin, just to start, it wasn't until later in your life that you really seemed to start speaking publicly about your experience growing up as the son of one of the most influential neo-Nazis in, American extremist history. And I think maybe that would be a good place to start. What changed? What made you, what compelled you to start talking about that experience?
Well, at first I didn't talk to anybody about my experience for the longest time because I didn't want to have any association. I didn't want anybody to know who my father was and what my association was. But eventually, in my later 20s, early 30s, I started telling some personal friends about my father. And I was universally met with the reaction like, oh my God, that's unbelievable. And you should write a book. And I always just blew that off. But what happened is, I left home at age 18, a profoundly damaged person due to the abuse of my father. And I was just so damaged and dealing with those feelings that I didn't really have the capacity to articulate or even think about the possibility of helping other people. That just wasn't part of my mindset back then. But after I started my foundation for giving back to orphans in Eastern Europe, I joined the Rotary Club, Rotary International. And as part of that, I was asked to be president of our local club for a year, which meant I had to get up and publicly run that meeting every single week for a year. And before that started, I was terrified of public speaking. But after doing that for a year, I became comfortable speaking in front of people. And another member of my club knew my story, and he felt like that it would be powerful for me to address my club as a guest speaker, because we would have a guest speaker every week, and just tell my story. And I was terrified to do that. But I put together some notes, and I spoke for about 25 minutes. And I was stunned by the reaction that I received. Absolutely stunned. There were people in the audience crying. There were people who were like, I had no idea you ever had any, part of your life that was like this. And there were people of color in the audience. They came up to me afterwards and said, this is one of the most powerful stories I've ever heard. And it was very healing for me. And that's when I decided, you know what? Maybe I should start telling other people. If it really did help somebody, then it's worthwhile. And that's when I started public speaking about my father.
I'm just curious, how old you were when you became familiar not only with the Turner Diaries, or just your father's political activism in the National Alliance or whatever. What was it like? How old were you? Was it going on in the background, or were you told about it directly?
Because as kids, you could be oblivious to that kind of stuff because it's just, that's home, that's normal, right?
Yeah, it is. It was what I thought was normal, but I certainly wasn't oblivious because, my father, the things that he would say, the reactions that he would have if he saw a black person on TV, he would make awful sounds. He would say really derogatory things about Black people, about Jewish people. He was very physically, emotionally, psychologically abusive of me. But, when I was probably 7 years old, I was taken to a picnic with the American Nazi Party, because my father was a member at that time. And they hung a huge swastika flag from the trees in the park when they were doing the picnic. And I remember seeing the police come and make them take that swastika flag down. And, my dad sometimes took me to his office, where the American Nazi Party was, or after Rockwell was killed. And then he formed his own hate group, the National Alliance. So I was very aware of it, probably from the time I was about 6 or 7 years old.
As you got older, I know that eventually your father would, leave you and your mother and kind of go off on his own. But I'm curious, how much of an impression growing up in that environment had on you, and sort of when things started to change. Again, kids, they're just very impressionable. And was there ever a point in time where you may have pantomimed or mirrored some of your father's beliefs? Probably, I would be surprised, just because he was such an extreme person, if anybody mirrored him 100%. But how did that influence you growing up? And then was there a point where you realized that something was off and you didn't believe this stuff?
I was profoundly influenced by my father as I was growing up. Almost all the time, I was just thinking about him, because he had this unreal hold over me, and he was, very abusive. But at the same time, I wanted his approval. I wanted his acceptance, and I never got that. And so, he taught me about different races. And he taught me about how he believed that whites were superior, that all non-whites were inferior, and some of them he even considered subhuman. And then he also taught me very diligently about what he called the Jewish scheme, about how their main mission in life was to bring down the white race, by using mass media to make white people complacent about racial issues, to encourage the mixing of whites with non-whites, things like that. So he taught me all of that. And because I was so mentally profoundly damaged by the abuse, I believed everything that he taught me. I believed that the Jews and non-whites were responsible for all the ills of our society. And I left home when I first went to college at age 18, holding those beliefs tight. And, when I left home, I really wasn't consciously aware of the fact that I had been abused, or that everything that happened wasn't just normal. I did not realize it until I went out into the real world that what happened was not normal by any means.
So when did you realize it?
I went to a very large university in Virginia Tech, and I started meeting people from all over the world. And my first roommate there was a person of color. I actually grew to really like this guy and to admire him. He was very liberal, very compassionate about other people. He spent a year in the Peace Corps before he came to become a student. And he taught me a lot about his work and about empathy for others. And, it took a long time, but those were the very first seeds that were being planted in my mind that, maybe my dad was wrong. Because certainly this roommate was nothing like what he described non-whites to be. He was very intelligent, very nice, very, So that was the first step that I think really started me thinking about it. But it took years. It took years for me to, gradually let go of those beliefs.
For people who don't know much about your father, he's not just some, silly guy who happened to be extremely racist and stuff. He was a physicist. He was a very smart guy, and in terms of the general population, he was fairly accomplished, at least in that field. I mean, compared to the average person, I struggle with physics. I'm just curious, like, what you think from when you saw him, what really drove him to be the person that he was? Because he chose to emphasize, radical right stuff much more than anything else in his life. And I'm just curious if you saw what might have motivated him to be like that rather than to be something else, because he certainly had the potential to be something else.
He certainly did. I mean, he literally had a genius level IQ and was, a doctorate in physics. He had a problem, though, with authority. And like when he was getting his advanced degree at Caltech in physics, he was also working at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And he was very frustrated because he felt like that all his coworkers were way below him in their intellectual abilities, and it frustrated him. And so he quit that job. And then when he got his doctorate in physics from the University of Colorado, my mom wanted him to get a job in industry because he could have commanded a really nice salary, but he refused because he didn't want people telling him what to do. So he took a job as a professor at Oregon State University, and it was at Oregon State University where he changed. And I think two things were happening. I think number one is because of his problem with authority and because of his not willing to just be a normal guy and work and support a family. And he read a lot of very sophisticated stuff, like he read Nietzsche, and he really aspired to the idea of the Übermensch, the Superman. And I think he had this fantastical vision of himself possibly being an Übermensch. But he was also exposed to things at Oregon State University, which is a very liberal campus. At the same time, the civil rights movement was going on, the Vietnam War was going on. He witnessed interracial couples for the first time on campus. And then he also started reading a lot about European history, the Bolshevik Revolution. He also, unfortunately, picked up and read a copy of Mein Kampf. And that's when his beliefs started changing. And that's when he decided that he didn't want to be a family man. He didn't want to be a father. He wanted to be the Übermensch, and he wanted to save the white race. And then he decided he was going to devote the rest of his life to doing that.
So your father's sort of legacy on white supremacist terrorism, violence, kind of comes in the form of what we're talking about, which is the Turner Diaries. I'm just curious, have you read the Turner Diaries? Do you have any sort of experience or thoughts about that book? Because it kind of became what would outlast him. There was a point where the FBI, was quoted in some publication calling it the Bible for white supremacist terrorists, right? I'm just curious if you had any experience with that book itself.
Yeah, I have read the book. I did not read it until way, way, way after it was published. I did not want to read it. But after I just started doing my public speaking and people started asking me about it, I did read the book. I knew what the book was all about, and I knew, what was coming out of my father's mind when he was writing the book. I knew that in my heart that what he wrote in that book and a couple other books that he wrote, that those were really direct reflections of the fantasies that he had about actions that he wished he could carry out himself.
When the Oklahoma City bombing took place in the 90s, and McVeigh became a sort of a household name, and people attributed it immediately to the Turner Diaries. For people who aren't familiar, there's like a scene that's like exactly the same as what happened, basically. If I recall correctly.
Even the bomb that McVeigh built is similar to a device described in the book, right?
Yes, that is correct.
How old were you, and how were you able to make those connections? Like, what were you thinking at the time that it happened?
So I was 35 when that bombing happened. And yes, I was able to make those connections. And I also knew that this was going to be a huge impact on my dad and his organization, because, you know, the whole time with the National Alliance, he was barely making it. He was just barely limping along. And, you know, at the most, sometimes he would have no more than like 1,500, you know, paid members paying dues, you know, throughout the entire world. And, you know, he just was barely making it. He was, you know, practically starving and working every day, writing and writing and writing, and not feeling like he was really making a difference or really getting through. But the Turner Diaries changed all of that. And, you know, when he first wrote the Turner Diaries, he did not intend to write it as a book. He was just writing a diary entry for each publication of his Attack magazine that he would publish every month and send out to all his subscribers. But it became so wildly popular, he decided to put all those together into a book. And yes, indeed, it is considered the Bible of the racist right now.
So growing up around your father, you were exposed to the white supremacist movement on a much deeper level than most people, you know, a kind of level that, you know, Mike and I, as reporters many years after the fact, or even historians looking through, you know, correspondence and stuff, just didn't have. And I'm curious if you think, is there anything that stands out to you about how those movements worked or how they functioned that you think the public might just not understand well, or even have misconceptions about?
I mean, I certainly think so. But there's been such a huge change in the movement, if that's what you would call it, from the time when my dad, you know, was in his infancy of the National Alliance or the American Nazi Party up to now. The early on, basically, you know, I was exposed to his group and to the people in that group, and almost exclusively, they were all just a bunch of losers. You know, these were like poorly educated, you know, grievance nursing white men who had nothing better to do than to dress up like stormtroopers and go out and act like thugs in public. They didn't really have a life or any. And there were a few intellectuals like my dad and a few of his friends who were like behind the scenes writing the words and, you know, doing the publications and trying to raise the money and trying to get the word out. But most of the people, most of the supporters were disaffected people who, you know, in my opinion, were not mentally well.
Yeah. On that front, you know, I have seen the type of people that you're talking about. I've been covering the radical right for a long time. And then there's just like the sort of, you know, like hateful oaf archetype, just who will just do whatever, you know, these hate groups, like just like the foot soldier type guy. And then somebody who is just kind of, like you said, mentally in need of help, right? Or somebody who maybe would be better off just getting some treatment somewhere or whatever. Did your father, I mean, did you ever witness anything where your father would be frustrated at all with the type of people he was recruiting? Obviously, you said he has his friends who are kind of intellectuals. We see that now with groups like American Renaissance and VDR, right? Where the top type people in those groups, like Peter Brimlow and Jared Taylor, are very close with one another. But you know, I once had a conversation with Andrew Anglin of the neo-Nazi Daily Stormer, and he, you know, privately badmouthed his readers. He described them as these idiots from the South, these whatever. I can't remember what he said privately. Yeah, I mean, did your father did you witness any frustration in recruitment? His like this inability to get over the hump of the like sort of 1,500 or whatever you said.
Oh, absolutely.
Members?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. And his biggest frustration was that it was those type of people that were responding to his message. But what he really wanted was the white-collar people, the intellectuals, the people who were like him to join him. And his biggest frustration is that these people are too comfortable. They're too comfortable with their salary. They're too comfortable with their suburban home and their 2 cars. And they're not willing to risk that to do what's needed to, save the white race. And he said it's because of that he was never able to really be successful in recruiting the type of people and the kind of people that he wanted, is that people were just too complacent, too lazy, too comfortable in their life to put their necks out.
I want to hear about kind of how you found a way to reconcile your experience growing up and then, transition out of this. Transition's maybe not the right word, but you obviously don't believe the things that your father believed. But I imagine that was very difficult. I mean, what's the cliche? We can't pick our parents, right? But aside from his abusive behavior towards you, which is its own trauma, I imagine it was very difficult to process and come to terms and figure out. I'm trying to imagine myself in your shoes, having the light bulb go off and be like, something is really wrong here, and I'm thinking, well, how would I begin to go about figuring out who I am? So I'm curious just to hear what that experience was like for you on a personal level.
It was a long road for sure. And again, because of the abuse, because of the massive feelings of unworthiness that I developed as I was growing up and held on to into my adulthood for years and years and years. My biggest issue was rejection. Anything that looked like or sounded like or tasted like rejection would flip a switch inside me to where I would shut down and shut out. And it was so counterproductive to being a healthy adult, to being a good husband, being a good father. And these patterns would repeat over and over and over again. And I could not do anything about it. One day, a professional peer of mine confided in me. He said, "Hey, look, Kelvin, I can see what's going on with you." And he says, "I had similar struggles when I was younger." He said, "But I got help." And he said, "You need to get help immediately." And I was like, and he's like, "Look, if you don't get help, your children are going to be profoundly influenced by your sadness as they're growing up. So if you don't do it for yourself, at least do it for your children." And so I did seek help. I went to a psychiatrist first, and he, after 2 sessions, was like, "Your dad's a sadist, you're depressed. Here's a prescription to antidepressants." I went to the drugstore to pick them up, and I was just like, you know what? This isn't the answer. I just know this isn't the answer. So I gave the pills back, and I went back to this guy, and I was like, "Well, what kind of help did you get?" And he goes, "Well, I worked with a really, really good counselor, and here's her name." And I went to see her. And that very first meeting with that counselor changed my life. She said, "You have incredibly awful tapes running through your head, and we need to erase those tapes, and we need to put new tapes in so that you can choose your thoughts wisely, and so that you will feel good about what you're thinking and not all the terrible, awful thoughts you have running through your mind." And through years of peeling back those layers of trauma and examining what I thought my beliefs were, all the thoughts running through my head, and learning that you have control over those thoughts. You don't have to reach out and touch those thoughts. You don't have to process. That's what changed my life.
That's so interesting, because for people who aren't closely familiar with the white supremacist movement, that's the exact type of thing they don't want people to do, right? They always condemn this as like sort of Jewish behavior, right? This is
Jewish brainwashing here.
You read the wrong book, that's Jewish behavior. You talk to the wrong person, that's also Jewish behavior. But really, the idea of introspection is condemned as being Jewish, right? And to be able to search yourself to try to understand what's going on, and what strikes me, I don't really have a question, but I just wanted to say this, is what strikes me about it is that it is a method of control, which I probably could have said before, but I realize as I hear you talking about feeling liberated after having done that, I realize that by cutting off, things like psychiatry or whatever, psychoanalysis, counseling, whatever. That is a way of control because they don't want you to actually really look at how you feel. They want you to feel that kind of fear, that's sort of like almost like a dog if it hits a shock thing or whatever. Not to bring up Hassan Parker meme or whatever is going on. If you touch some shock thing, you can't go somewhere, right? To get true liberation, there's no shock.
That's absolutely true. And these groups, they're looking for, people who are suffering. And these people who are suffering are looking for some sort of connection to something that's bigger than themselves. And so because of their ignorance and because of their suffering, it's easier for them, instead of looking inside and saying, why do I feel this way? It's easier for them to blame somebody else or something else for the way they feel, instead of saying, hey, why do I really feel this way? What is it that I really believe that makes me feel this way? Instead, you say, oh, it's the immigrants in this country. They're taking all our jobs. They're doing this, they're doing this, they're doing this. And then you learn to hate them, and you learn to associate with people that hate the same thing that you do. And it makes you feel better because, I'm superior, I'm white, I'm better than everybody else. And I have all these friends who believe the same thing. It's a terrible, vicious cycle, but that's how these groups get people, in their mindset.
Kind of zooming out on the world today, as we get closer to the end here, it seems like, and especially online, the kind of hate that your father, dedicated so much of his life to promoting and stoking is almost as mainstream as it's ever been. I mean, certainly the underlying attitudes of racism and bigotry have permeated society for as long as it's existed, but this really harder edge, nastier edge of stuff seems to be taking up an outsized amount of the conversation in politics today. And as we're getting closer to the end here, I'm just curious what your thoughts personally on that are, just given your experience and your background, and that you've had a much, more personal and intimate look at this stuff than I would think pretty much anybody else on on Earth might have.
Well, I mean, I definitely agree with you that, racism has been a part of the human condition forever. I did believe, before 2016, that things might be getting better in our country. You didn't see the outward expressions of racism and hatred as often as you had, earlier on. It became more politically incorrect. But then with the 2016 election cycle, that changed. You had a potential leader that was saying, basically, it's okay to express these signs of hatred and these words of hatred against the other. It's okay to do that in public. And it basically made, the expression of your true racist beliefs that you had been holding down, it made it unassailable. It's okay now. And then, now it's just getting worse and worse and worse. And, ethnic identifications are repeatedly exploited for power and security. They are done for one reason only, and that's for separating us from them. And modern demagogues use that identification to stir up a powerful hatred of the other. And because it's useful for them. If they have this powerful hatred of the other, they're not focusing on what they should be focusing on. They're not focusing on, hey, I need better health care. I need more affordable healthcare. Hey, there should be, economic equality through all the people in this country. Instead, they're focused on this hatred that's being stirred up, and it's used for power. It's used for greed, and it's terrible what's happening in our world and in our country as a result of that.
On that note, your father died at a fairly young age, at 68, from cancer. It was 2002. It was the Bush years. I'm sure his health was declining through most of that. So it was kind of really Clinton to Bush. What do you think he would have thought of, first Obama and second Trump? I'm just, just on my mind.
Well, I know what he would have thought of Obama. He would have been.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't repeat that on this podcast, but
he would have been so thoroughly disgusted. It would have been, and I think a lot of the things that have happened in this country since Obama have happened because our country elected a black man as president. I think there were so many people who were so outraged that their president was a black man that gave rise to, Trump and people like him. I think that has a lot to do with it. I really do. And, as far as Trump, I think he probably would have loved Stephen Miller, and his policies and stuff, but I'm not sure that he would have liked Trump as an individual, simply because of, what an incredibly, well, I don't know if we should really get into that on this show, but, my dad, likes intellectual people and, people who are really trying to do something, whether it's worthy or not in our eyes. And so I think he would have been disgusted by Trump as well.
Well, he might have followed the same pattern as some of the people who were influenced by your father, who Jared and I have covered closely, which is they were really excited in 2016 to get their issues into a megaphone.
Yes.
But have subsequently, some of them, and we're talking about a particular type of extremist, have turned because they believe he's too allied with what they would describe as like Jewish power or whatever, right, or something like that, and are kind of disgusted with just the mess and the sloppiness and the whatever else, which seems to be sort of what you're saying.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Kelvin, what are you up to now? Because you're over in Georgia, right? The country?
Yeah, I'm in the country of Georgia. And so, 30 years ago, my wife and I adopted 2 children from the country of Georgia when they were 3 months old. About 20 years ago, I decided to form a foundation to administer to orphans in this country as a way of giving back to Georgia for the incredible gifts that we received. And I just, it was just a little idea. Oh, I can go and I can take a few presents and help out a few kids. And it's kind of blossomed into something much bigger than I ever imagined it could be. And so it's called the Divine Child Foundation. And we run several orphanage houses and children's counseling centers here. But I'm also in the process now of adopting a 3rd child that actually grew up in one of my houses. I've met hundreds and hundreds of kids here in Georgia, but this one kid was just so exceptional and just reached out to me and stole my heart. And so that's what I'm living here for now, is to provide this child a home and a chance at a successful future.
Well, Kelvin, thanks so much for posting through it this week. It's been great talking to you, and it's so nice to hear that you were able to take everything that happened in your earlier life and then sort of direct that energy into helping other people, helping other children find their way.
Also, it gives me a lot of hope. I will just say your whole story gives me a lot of hope about getting out of the situation that we're all in.
Well, my pleasure meeting you both and chatting with you. Thanks for the invitation.